Does it feel like the government is building property completely non-stop? Every other weekend, there's a new private launch, another massive BTO exercise, or a headline screaming about how thousands of homes are flooding the market. Naturally, this triggers some form of investor panic. Are we walking straight into a brutal oversupply trap? If you look at the raw spreadsheets, the skeptics have a seemingly bulletproof argument. Our total population may be 6.1 million currently, but our resident population, which is the one that can actually afford a property in Singapore, stands at roughly 4.2 million. Divide that by our average household size of 3.06 and we would mathematically only need about 1.37 million homes. Yet, Singapore has a total of over 1.6 million constructed residential dwellings. And on paper, that is a terrifying surplus of over 250,000 units just sitting empty. Today, we are breaking down Singapore's true supply framework. We are going to be unpacking the macro baseline, expose the exact micro market choke, and also reveal the ticking demographic time bomb that explains exactly why the market is moving the way it is. So, is this an oversupply situation? Let's take a look at the data. But to begin, a truly oversupplied market like ghost cities overseas happens when development completely decouples from real-world population growth, relying on speculative hot money from investors abroad. Singapore completely insulates itself from this using two macro levers. The first one being the absolute population demand alignment. The government is still working towards the long-term planning framework outlined in the population white paper tracking towards a 6.9 million population target by 2030. To support that trajectory, you will need a matching baseline of housing units. Every plot released under the Government Land Sales or GLS program is calibrated by authorities who match physical land supply directly to local household formation projections. And number two, the second macro protection is the draconian 60% additional buyer's stamp duty on foreign buyers. By effectively shutting the door on international speculative capital, the government forced the entire real estate market to decouple from global volatility. And because over 95% of our transaction volume is backed by local citizens or permanent residents buying for their own physical stay or domestic wealth preservation, the demand floor is organic, heavily capitalized, and real. You cannot have a macro on oversupply when speculation is legally out of existence. But what about that 250,000 unit paper surplus? Remember that outside of our resident population, we still have 1.9 million non-residents that need a place to stay too. And once you take out the dependents and the domestic workers living with employers, you will have approximately a 1.31 million foreigners who rely entirely on the open market units for rental. Spread them across that 250,000 unit paper surplus and it aggregates to an average of 5.3 people per household. If you think those units are sitting vacant, let's take a look at the actual transaction velocity. In 2025 alone, Singapore clocked 39,000 HDB rental transactions and 89,000 private rental transactions. That is a massive 128,000 rental transactions annually, and over a standard 2-year lease cycle that covers 257,000 units, assuming that all of them are unique rental transactions. The macro math balances out almost perfectly. The paper surplus is entirely absorbed by real-world rental velocity. So why are BTOs still oversubscribed? And why are buyers still aggressively bidding up new launches? Let's take a look at the public housing market first. We currently have over 15,000 HDB flats listed for sale out of the entire stock of over 1.16 million HDB units. That means that only a tiny over probably 1% of total supply is actively circulating in the open market. And if you look at the history of HDB construction throughout the years, you'll notice massive completion spikes in 1984, 1998, and 2017. However, half of our entire national housing stock was actually built before 1990, meaning that approximately 580 units are now at least 36 years old with 63 years or less left on their leases, which means younger buyers will have issues purchasing these units as they may not cover them till 95 years old and may have further implications such as CPF usages down the road. And this historical footprint completely explains today's oversubscription headlines. When you break down active HDB listings, the vast majority are older units built in the year 2000 or earlier, but meanwhile, the latest batch of modern flats that actually completed their MOP between 2018 and 2021 are completely scarce. The market has a fierce, uncompromising preference for newer units. Buyers are aggressively driving up prices for fresh MOP flats and oversubscribing BTOs because the modern segment of the HDB market is severely undersupplied, while the older legacy flats are the ones facing a quiet structural glut. The other thing to address is the government's ramping up supply for BTOs. It may seem that they are building a lot of BTOs now because we only have the recent comparison during the COVID period. And now, the media loves to label recent land injections as an aggressive supply ramp-up, but historically that is a complete optical illusion. Over a decade ago, between 2014 and 2017, the government was actively churning out 27,000 to 35,000 completed units a year. From year 2018 onwards, those pipelines were aggressively tapered down, and when the pandemic hit in 2020, production slammed to a near stop, dropping to a historic low of just 7,000 completed units due to severe labor shortages. So even in our aggressive ramp-up stance now, BTO production at best is still recovering from that massive pandemic production deficit. Island-wide, we are definitely not structurally oversupplied for newer HDBs for sure. There is also a matter of the newer HDB policies and the recent BTO launches, but we will cover that in another video. Now let's move over to the private property market. To make this an accurate breakdown of existing resale supply, we are filtering out all future new launch ads and strictly limiting our searches to completed developments only. For landed housings, there are nearly 3,000 homes listed for sale. Even if you adjust for duplicated listing, that still represents a tight 4% of total supply circulating, with the vast majority of course being the highly coveted freehold plots. True landed property remains an elite game of absolute scarcity. But when we look at private condominium, the data flips in a way that completely contradicts mainstream headlines. There are over 25,000 resale condos actively listed for sale, representing a substantial close to 7% of the total market supply. And look at how the inventory breaks down by age. This is the ultimate paradox. Consumers are rushing to snap up expensive new launches out of fear of missing out, yet the highest concentration of circulating resale inventory on the market right now is heavily locked up in newer private units built between 2014 to 2026. Even if we isolate just the newest condos that completed construction in the recent 5 years, we are still looking at an over 8,000 units fighting for buyers. Let's put that into context. In 2020, Singapore had 327,000 completed private units. By 2025, that number jumped to 375,000, meaning 48,000 brand new private units flooded the market in just 5 years. Right now, out of that fresh batch, we have over 8,000 units listed for sale and over 3,000 of these units listed for rental. That means that nearly 25% of this recently completed supply is actively fighting for a buyer or sitting vacant waiting for a tenant, assuming that there are no overlaps in the listings. And that is still not accounting for the barely gross profitable units or the unprofitable ones that were sold to cut loss. If you are buying a new launch today purely as an investment, you will have to account for this 25% potential downside risk. While everyone is panicking about shortages in the BTO market, the private condo market is displaying an accumulation of modern inventory. So is the Singapore private condo markets in an oversupply situation? The reason people feel a condo oversupply today is entirely due to micro market concentration. Instead of spreading developments out evenly, the authorities shifted towards massive hyper-focused township in areas like Tengah, Lentor, and One North. In Lentor, you have a rapid succession of private condos launching right next to each other. However, that said, if you blindly purchase a generic unit in these supply-heavy enclaves expecting a quick capital flip, your assets will be caught in an intense localized undercutting for a decade before the neighborhood matures or the supply evens out. And based on the data we've seen, it's become obvious. The private market supply is heavily geared towards renting to our non-resident population. If you are buying a private property as an investment today, your primary safeguard is your rental yield, assuming that you've already done your holding cost math. Stop expecting quick flips. Our modern inventory is already accumulating and cash flow is your only true protection. This brings us to the ultimate macro horizon. Because if we look 10 to 20 years down the road, Singapore's real estate market is walking straight into a massive demographic transformation driven by two unstoppable forces. The first one is the shrinking family nucleus. Look at the long-term trend in marriage rates. Outside of the artificial pandemic distortions, general marriage rates per 1,000 unmarried residents have been in a steady multi-decade decline. Younger generations are marrying much later, having fewer children, half of what we saw 40 years ago, and household sizes are actively shrinking to almost below 3 per household now. The legacy consumer demographic that eagerly swallowed up large multi-room suburban family properties is naturally consolidating. And number two, we have the passing of a generation. At the exact same time, our population is rapidly aging. Over the next 2 decades, as the pioneer and baby boomer generations naturally pass on, an immense volume of legacy public and private housing units in mature estates will flow back into the open resale market via inheritance sales. Further down the road, there will also be fewer young home buyers entering the base of the property pyramid, combined with an inevitable surge of legacy family assets returning to an open market, creating a significant structural mismatch for our traditional real estate models. Will these two combined start to create a surge in perhaps more unit types in the future? Or would people even start choosing lifestyle over functional spaces moving forward? When you connect all of the pieces together, the final verdict is clear. Singapore's property market is definitely not oversupplied right now. In the long run, a country that has a very attractive tax bracket and is considered a safe haven globally will definitely attract more citizens for sure. Couple that with limited land, you will have a consistent, strong demand for residential properties in the long run. In fact, the data reveals that the government has completely foreseen these future demographic shifts. They aren't trying to hyperinflate or massive overbuild to fix temporary problems like the past. Instead, right now, what they're doing is a highly calculated wait-and-see macro strategy. By keeping national supply tightly controlled and pacing infrastructure projects across a 10 to 30-year horizon, they are ensuring that the market remains fundamentally stable as our demographics transform. They are playing defense and they are protecting the property values as a retirement anchor while letting the population growth glide towards the 2030 target. The takeaway for you as a buyer is simple. Stop worrying about the broad national headlines and start focusing intensely on the micro market selection. If you buy a generic private property unit in the concentrated supply-heavy pocket without distinct defensive anchors, you will face years of sideways stagnation. But if you position your capital in highly defensive zones backed by elite schools or direct transit integration or even upcoming transformation, then your portfolio will remain bulletproof. So don't buy into the media hype. Don't FOMO on every single new launch that comes out. Buy into the micro data and do the deep research there instead. That's it for today, and if you like videos like this, consider subscribing to the channel. My name is ASAP and I will see you in the next video.